Hello everyone, today I'm going to be breaking down the Electoral College, the institution that directly elects the president. So what you see in front of you is the United States, all 50 states. Let's just show Alaska and Hawaii down there. Hello, there you are. So what is the Electoral College? The Electoral College is a national institution that directly elects the president. It was mandated in the Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. And the reason why the Founding Fathers instituted this thing is to limit majority control. Now, of course, at the time, given that a lot of the people were relatively uneducated, that kind of meant taking control away from them and into the power of the elite so that they could decide the president. But over time, as suffrage expanded, first property rights, then race, sex, and lowering the age to 18, it's really become more of an archaic form of electing our president. In fact, a lot of people don't even know that this institution even exists. A lot of people assume that the president is determined solely by the popular vote. Now, that isn't necessarily true, but we're going to break down for you exactly what this system involves, what the implications are, and some of the downfalls of this system. So, the Electoral College is made up of electors from each state, plus the District of Columbia. In the 50 states, the number of electors for each state is equal to the sum of that state's representatives and senators. Now, as you know, every state has 2 senators, regardless of its population. But the House of Representatives, that's determined by population. So because of that, this entire system is kind of like the House of Representatives, in that the larger states have more representation within the Electoral College. And every state, I should say, has a minimum of 3 electors, because every state has a minimum of 1 representative and 2 senators. And the 23rd Amendment said that the District of Columbia would have 3 electors in the Electoral College. The original Constitution did not grant the District of Columbia electors because at the time of the Constitution being framed, the District of Columbia didn't even exist. It wasn't the capital. It was, as you know from history, it was only later on that the District of Columbia was formed in order to sort of equalize the North and the South, placing it from the northern cities, such as New York and Philadelphia, down more towards the center, so it's kind of equal. But this changed with the 23rd Amendment, which was ratified in 1961. And as I said, it grants the district 3 electors in the Electoral College. As of 2016, none of the U.S. territories have electors. So this includes Puerto Rico, Guam, Virgin Islands, and all those little territories that we have out there. But even though they don't have electors, they do have primaries and caucuses, so the parties still use them when determining their nominees for the convention. Since 1961, the Electoral College has had 538 members in it. The seats are redistributed among the states every decade when the census is conducted. However, the total membership has remained at 538. So after each census, a big state like California could lose electoral votes and representatives if its population decreases with respect to the national population. So because it's with respect to the population instead of the actual number, the number is able to remain at 538. It's kind of like the House of Representatives, how the number is always set at 435. So how does it work? How does this big old system work? Well, the Electoral College officially votes on the Monday after the second Wednesday of December on a presidential election year. So how it works is that the delegations from each state's electors, they meet in their respective capitals. So Massachusetts has 11 electoral votes. 9 representatives plus 2 senators. And they would all meet in Boston. New Hampshire would meet in Concord, Vermont, and Montpelier, and so on and so forth. The 530 members never meet in the same room together. Although it's not specified in the Constitution, the delegations from 48 of these states, plus the District of Columbia, the person that wins the most votes in that state wins all of the electoral votes, regardless of whether it's 50% plus 1 or if it's a complete landslide. So the winner of Massachusetts, the person that wins the most votes, not necessarily the majority, will win all 11 of the electoral votes. And in order to become president, you need to win a majority in the Electoral College. Since 1961, that magic number, the minimum number of electoral votes needed to win the presidency, is 270. Now, as I just said, 48 states plus the District of Columbia cast all of their votes to the winner of the state, a winner-take-all system. However, there are 2 states that do not use this system. Those states are Maine and Nebraska. So how does Maine and Nebraska cast their electoral votes? Well, Maine has 4 electoral votes and Nebraska has 5. So how it works is that they set each of these 2 states, they set aside 2 of those electors to the winner of the state. So 2 from Nebraska and 2 from Maine will go to whoever wins the entire state. For the other 2 in Maine and the other 3 in Nebraska, there are contests within the congressional districts within those states. Maine has 2 congressional districts and 2 representatives. Nebraska has 3 congressional districts and 3 representatives. The winner of the election per se in each of those congressional districts will win 1 electoral vote for each congressional district they win. So let's say that Donald Trump wins the state of Maine. He wins the entire state. He gets 2 votes. He gets 2 electoral votes just for winning the whole state. Now let's say he only wins 1 congressional district in Maine. He gets that elector, so he gets 3. But let's say Bernie Sanders wins the other congressional district. Then he walks away with 1. So even if Bernie didn't win the entire state, if he wins that 1 congressional district, then he will get at least 1 electoral vote from the state of Maine. So, a question you might be asking now is, what if no one wins the Electoral College? What if no one cracks that magic number of 270? The troubleshoot for that is found in the 12th Amendment. If no one wins a majority in the Electoral College, the fate of the election falls to the House of Representatives, where a candidate must win a majority of the states. Now, I must stress for this, the states. So what happens in Washington is that the delegations from each of the states all gather together and they all must agree on 1 candidate. So the 9 representatives from Massachusetts, they have to agree on 1 winner. Either all 9 representatives are going to go to Bernie Sanders or all 9 are going to go to Donald Trump. It's easy for small states like Vermont or Wyoming to do this because it's just 1 representative. Only 1 person needs to make up their mind. But when you get to a state like California, you got 53 representatives in that state. Texas, New York, Florida, those are huge states. And there are a lot of representatives. So because of that, it's going to be a little more difficult for all those people to agree on one person. The problem is that if a delegation can't reach an agreement for one candidate, what happens is that entire state decides to abstain from the vote in the House. So if California can't reach an agreement, if all 53 of those people can't agree on one candidate, they could just abstain. There's a problem to that. In order for a candidate to win the presidency in the House, they gotta win 26 states. If 25 or more states abstain because the delegations couldn't come to an agreement, then we have a big issue. There's no winner in the House. And unfortunately, the Constitution doesn't provide any troubleshoot for that issue. The good news is that there have only been 2 elections that have ever fallen into the House of Representatives. Those were 1800 and 1824, none of which produced that issue where none of the states could produce a majority. So that's good. Now what's interesting is that the Constitution also provides for a vice president issue if none of the vice presidential candidates win a majority in the House. In the Electoral College. That happens, the election falls into the Senate, and the same procedure happens. But that has only happened one time in U.S. history, in 1836. So, good news is that we don't really need to worry about that. Now, faithless electors. The Constitution does not say that electors from any state has to vote for the winner. Ideally, if Donald Trump won the state of Maine, let's go back to the scenario earlier. If he won 3 electoral votes from Maine, and Bernie Sanders won 1, they could flip-flop that. They could, hypothetically, constitutionally speaking, they could all just vote for Donald Trump or all for Bernie Sanders. There have been 157 cases in U.S. history where that has happened. However, it has been spread out enough so that it has never influenced or changed the outcome of the election. 26 states and the District of Columbia have laws against this. However, no faithless elector has ever been imprisoned for their vote. So what they do is that they basically just void it. If that one elector going to Bernie Sanders, if they vote for Donald Trump, they're just not going to count it. There's actually a record for the election with the most faithless electors. It happened in 1872. What happened in that election was that one of the candidates, Horace Greeley, he won 66 electoral votes. But before the Electoral College met in their respective state capitals, Greeley died. So, as a result, all those electors, they were kind of free because what am I going to do? Am I going to vote for Horace Greeley even though he's dead? 3 of them did end up voting for Greeley even though he was dead. But 63 of those electors, they decided to just, whatever, and cast their vote for different minor candidates. It didn't change the outcome because the incumbent, Ulysses S. Grant, he was running for re-election that year, and he got 286, so it didn't do anything. It didn't really change the outcome, despite that many electors. I actually think that in today's political climate, given how polarized it is, I think if that happened today, it would make a difference, like a big one. Another interesting fact about faithless electors was in the election of 1820. What happened for there was that another incumbent, James Monroe, he was running for re-election that year, and he walked away with every single state. He won all of them. His main opponent that year was Rufus King, so he didn't really have much in the way, and he was also a pretty popular president. 3 of his electors, however, they died before the Electoral College congregated, so he didn't get those votes. What was interesting is that a 4th one was William Plumer. He was an elector from New Hampshire over here. What he did was that even though James Monroe won the state of New Hampshire, he cast his vote against James Monroe. He voted for John Quincy Adams, who was another candidate in the race. Some historical scholars believe that Plumer did this because he believed that George Washington, our first president, was the only person that was worthy of getting a unanimous vote in the Electoral College. And to this day, George Washington remains the only president to have a unanimous majority in the Electoral College. So I thought I'd bring that up. So, what are the implications of this Electoral College system? A lot. So, if I may, let's go to the biggest state in our country, California. They got about 39 million people living there today, and they have 55 electoral votes. Not too far from it is Wyoming, which is our smallest state, which has about 600,000 people, and 3 electoral votes. If you do the math for this, 1 electoral vote in California is worth 709,091 people. If you go over to Wyoming, 1 electoral vote in Wyoming is worth 200,000 people. 1 California electoral vote is 3.55 times the population of 1 Wyoming vote, electoral vote. I did that. I was able to calculate that by just dividing the 709,091 by 200,000. And then I divided the 39 million people that altogether live in California and the 600,000 people total that live in Wyoming. The quotient for that is 65. California has 65 times the people of California, but it only has 3.5 times the electoral vote per person. What can we conclude from that? We can conclude that in small states, that 1 voter has more voting power. Your vote in Wyoming will have a greater percentage towards who ends up winning that state. So it's important to vote in small states because you can really shake things up. But if you live in California, on the other hand, I'm not going to say your vote is worthless, but you're going to have to convince a lot more people to vote for the candidate you want to vote for if you want to produce any results in California. So, we can conclude from that the Electoral College, one of the things about the Electoral College is that it systematically overrepresents small states, the people living in small states. This is due to the fact that no matter how small a state is, it has to have at least 1 representative in the House of Representatives, and it always has to have 2 senators. So because of that, you're always guaranteed at least 3 electoral votes in the Electoral College, no matter how small your state is. Mind you, in most states like California, Massachusetts, states with more than 700,000 people, the average population of a constituency for the House of Representatives is about 700,000 people. Wyoming, the population of the entire state of Wyoming is less than that of 1 congressional district in California, but yet it still has to have at least 1 representative. So, since electors are calculated by the sum of representatives and senators, if the people living in small states like Wyoming are overrepresented in the House, then they're probably going to be overrepresented in the Electoral College too. Now, that's not to say that large states are disadvantaged. In fact, they do have more voting power than small states, of course. In fact, let's do some math here. So, I set this up so that Bernie Sanders is carrying only the 11 largest states in the country. The blue states are the 11 most populous states in the country. Donald Trump has the 39 least populous states. So in terms of rank by population, Donald Trump is carrying all the states from 12 to 50. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see the count for the electoral votes. Bernie Sanders has 270 electoral votes just from carrying the 11 largest states. That makes him the winner. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he's carrying 39 states, and yet it only adds up to 268. So that shows that the true immense power that large states have, even though if you're an individual voter in California, it's harder to get your opinion across because there's so many more people voting. But if you win in California, you get 55 right off the bat. So just imagine if you did that to the next 10 biggest states. Let's do an experiment. So like I said earlier, if you win the 11 most populous states, you'll become president. Living today in America, there are 321 million people. Obviously, that includes people like me who are under the age of 18 and aren't old enough to vote. However, I believe that by the time you guys see this in class, I will be a registered voter. And also if you subtract all the people that are over 18, that just to say, yeah, I'm not going to register to vote. For the sake of this experimental election, we're going to assume that all 321 million people, your grandpa, maybe your great-grandparents, all the way down to the youngest infant in America, they're all going to be registered voters. And because they're all politically active, not really, not in real life, but for this experiment, we're going to have 100% turnout. It's Bernie Sanders' dream. For this election, we're going to have Bernie Sanders win 50% of the vote in California, Texas, and all these 11 largest states. He's going to win by the bare minimum 50% plus